Hello, everyone. How are you today? I've got a old friend of mine, Ash Nallawalla, who's come on, who's just written a book, actually, but also been around in the SEO industry since as long as me, if not longer than me. And I think his story is a really interesting one. He's a great character and got a lot to share with the industry. So, hi, Ash. How are you?
Hi, Dixon. I'm fine. Enjoying the summer weather in the Northern Hemisphere here in Toronto. I normally live in Melbourne.
Absolutely,
so
yeah. So getting yourself out there is out to the north, but you're up in Canada though, aren't you? Doesn't get hot in Canada. I've been told it's always cold in Canada. Maybe I'm reading that wrong, or was before global warming.
Yeah.
So, guys, so Ash, before I go into some of the other things, can you tell people a little bit about, how you got into SEO, who you are, and what you've been doing SEO with over the years?
So my background is one of those meandering career paths. I trained as an accountant, worked for a chartered accountant, and to cut the jump a few years, I hated accounting. So I joined the Royal Australian Air Force in Australia. So I was living in New Zealand and moved to Australia for a couple of years, but the couple of years is still like 42 years later. And it doesn't look like I'm going back to New Zealand. But the Air Force set me up for some of the skills I needed later on, especially publishing. I was in charge of a technical publishing team. I used Ventura Publisher to lay out the books. And that got me in civilian life as a technical editor for Unisys. And that's where I learned what proper English or American English is. And I had to edit books or software manuals in three kinds of English, which is British English, US English, and Australian English. And the three...
That right there, that's interesting, because that's something that SEOs probably don't pay an awful lot of attention to, three different types of English. We all know that we can set our Windows or our Mac laptops up in those kind of three different languages. But I didn't realize that, going back, 40, 50 years, even then, things were being written in three different types of English.
Well, the challenges between British English and Australian English, which superficially is the same, but in Australia, we use the Macquarie Dictionary as the standard, which is from one of our universities. And for the UK, you can use whatever you want. And in my case, it was the Cambridge Dictionary, because that's what Unisys had recommended, as opposed to the Oxford Dictionary. And one difference I recall is I think Oxford prefers the IZ spellings and Cambridge prefers the IS spellings in words like organization. So that,
or even in optimization.
Correct. Yeah. And that got me slowly into the marketing side of things. I was a product manager there. And in later jobs, it was technical, such as Hayes, the modem people. And that's where I built my very first website for all the Hayes companies in Asia. Right. I'd be embarrassed to show them to you. Maybe they're somewhere in archive.org, but they were hand-coded.
So that was Hayes the Manuals, was it?
Yeah. Well, Hayes the modem company.
Oh, right. Oh, Hayes modems. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, okay. The inventor of the domestic house modems.
Yeah. I had one of them. Those are the days. And so you and I, well, before we met in real life, we met in the early days, I think, of Webmaster World, unless we met on Gym Tools or something before that. But and you're a CRM 911 on Webmaster World, was that right?
I'm a Nallawalla on Webmaster World, but I use CRM 911 on, maybe I used it on Gymworld. So I used to be on several of those old forums.
Yep.
I'm still there on Webmaster World as a moderator in the local search forum.
Okay,
And
so we can always track you down there. I think I might just go through and use this as a platform to interview all the Webmaster World moderators and get me a pretty good baseline of how the internet marketing industry developed. I think because those were good times, basically. Gymworld and Webmaster World. I think we really forged a I don't know, a methodology for search engine optimization, for internet marketing, for, I wouldn't say critical thinking all the time, but for having ideas put up and slapped back down again, possibly is more appropriate. But it was interesting times and interesting places. It's good to see you're still there on the still moderating on the forum there. Okay, well, let's get on to your book. So Accidental SEO has just come out. I want to start with it's a great read, by the way. I'm on page 144 at the moment. But why the title? I know you say that at the start of the book, but hey, then there's people on the podcast.
well, most SEOs themselves are accidental, at least the ones I've met. No one went to high school and said, I want to become an SEO. They planned to be something, accountant in my case, and then maybe a marketer later on. But when I left Macromedia, I was their CRM manager for Asia Pacific. I built this website called crm911.com, and it was meant to be a CRM consulting practice. It never operated as a CRM consultant, but it ranked #1 for nearly 10 years. And the fact that it ranked so well got me my first assignment through a referral to a company that's a NASDAQ listed company now called Ring Central. In those days, it was privately owned, and that got me into SEO. And later on, when I worked for some larger companies like banks and insurance companies, I noticed that most of my managers had no SEO background. They were the accidental SEO managers. Somehow, they'd landed themselves a role that included 2 or 3 teams, such as content, CMS, and this thing called SEO. And many of them had no idea how to deal with it. In Australia, we have something that's quite different from North America, which is SEO is seldom part of the marketing silo. I've been in 2 places, in 2 companies where it used to be that way, but someone before me had pulled it out of marketing and put it into product. So budgets were never as generous as PPC.
Right.
I've been in places where the PPC budget was well into the 20 and 30 million region annually.
Wow.
And SEO was lucky if it even reached 500,000.
Yeah.
Which was largely salaries.
This is it's a problem in the SEO industry, or has been a problem for a long time, hasn't it, really? This idea that, SEO is always the afterthought of a business, and yet the PPC market seems to lap up all the money. Do you think that's a real shame, or do you think there is a reason behind that?
It is a shame, and I understand why it happens. In many companies where I've worked, PPC would bring in about 40% to 30% of online revenues. SEO in the same companies used to bring 30 to 60% of online revenues. And that doesn't cut any ice when you want more money, even for simple tools. I've had, I won't name the tools, but some really popular ones that you're very familiar with. I had to justify, and then I was rejected for wanting to spend $1,000 a year, for example.
Mm.
So it's difficult in a large company, depending on who your accidental SEO manager is or who their manager is. But SEO sometimes gets the raw end of the deal.
Well, I'm talking about tools. You mentioned Majestic in the book, so thank you very much for that. I mean, I remember the early days of Majestic, or early days of my involvement with Majestic. You were very, very well. Basically, you must have been an incredible consumer of information throughout your life, because you read almost every post I put out, it seems. Not only that, but you showed me the typos. So and I'm renowned for being having typos. So I remember vividly you pointing out my typos and typos in product as well. So thank you very much for that. But it just shows your attention to detail, which I guess stemmed from your time as with Ventura Publishing, or using Ventura Publishing. But does that stick out for you? A typo, does it just stick out, just fly off the page and hit you in the face?
Absolutely. And I was recently brought down to earth, because editors can sometimes be arrogant. They think they don't need to turn on the spell checker, and I don't, because I think I know everything. So when I published this book, or before I sent it for printing, I thought, oh, well, let's just try this thing called Grammarly. It's tagging me everywhere I go.
Yeah.
And I need to just see what it has to say. And boy, I had to put the book through Grammarly twice, because for some reason it doesn't find everything the first time. It feels that maybe it's embarrassed me enough. And then I put it through Microsoft Word's own checker, and boy, I found one or two things that Grammarly had not picked up. So I was absolutely shocked.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so sometimes we think that we are so good that we can spot a typo at 100 paces, but then we forget that we make typos ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I must admit, I couldn't live without Grammarly now. I mean, now I've seen it over my content. It's sitting there on my Word documents as I look at the screen here, and my notes. It's everything has to have a go with Grammarly, because it's not just the typos. It helps me with my sentence structure and stuff. And I think it's amazing how many errors I make, even when I think I've got it right. So that's interesting that even an eye like yours still needs a tool like Grammarly to stop you from going astray, really. So anyway, you'll go back to the book a little bit. Accidental SEO. What are you trying to? Who is the audience that you're trying to talk to? You kind of talked about two different audiences: the SEO, but also the C-suite that wanted to know what the hell the SEOs did, right?
Yeah. A few days ago, I think after I published the book, I had a realization that the problem that I've been trying to address is a lack of web governance. I think that is the key problem that trickles down to the SEO level. And I didn't know it at the time when I was writing the 3 books. Initially, it was a single manuscript. And a good friend of mine, who is a former CEO of a couple of NASDAQ-listed companies, told me very frankly that if you put SEO on the cover, no CEO or C-suite person is going to pick it up. So he suggested that I use some salesy language, such as leads and profits, and words like that interest the C-suite.
Yeah.
I was trying to address a different audience at that stage. I wanted to start with the accidental SEO manager.
Yep.
I felt that they need a level of knowledge that's not detailed, not how to do SEO, how to do keyword research at any level of detail, but they need to know what is required, what's their checklist of things to see whether their own internal or external SEO consultant is doing or not doing. Therefore, I decided that the first book needed to be pulled out from the manuscript and called The Accidental SEO Manager. The third book is tentatively called Untapped. And I'm not sure about that anymore. It might change. Maybe I'll try and fit in web governance there and see whether that fits.
Do you think I wonder if the SEOs, CEOs will like the word web governance any more than SEO?
Well, that's how passionate I am about web governance. I think that all these issues stem from allowing SEO to just happen any way it happens. And as long as there's someone sitting in a chair with the word SEO stamped on their forehead, everyone seems to be happy. But the point is, not everyone with that rubber stamp on their head is necessarily the right SEO for the company. They might be great at some other kind of SEO because there are many types of SEO, but simply hiring such a person or such a consultant or agency may not be the right fit for your company. So I wanted to enlighten both the managers and the C-suites through these three books.
So book 2 and book 3 are not going to have the word SEO in the title. Is that the idea?
Well, book 2 will probably have SEO because it is aimed at the manager. It's going to be important conversations that they need to have with their SEO team. So anything that's slightly technical, I felt was perhaps a little too overwhelming to put in the first book. Once they've read the first book, they might be brave enough to tackle things like Core Web Vitals and using Lighthouse scores and starting those conversations with their own teams or advisors to see what's involved, why is it important, will it change my ranking, which we know doesn't necessarily improve your ranking, but it definitely improves speed, which is important to end users. So such conversations definitely are a little more technical. Maybe accessibility is another area that you could write books on it. But you just need to give the manager the right level of information so that they can make sure that their website is going to be accessible and fast. So that's where the second book will be aimed. These are tentative titles for now.
Yeah, but you're not shy of going into talking about tools and technologies within the first book, within Accidental SEO Manager, because you talk about Majestic, so thank you very much for that. You talk about inlinks in there, but you talk a lot about you cover the vast majority of sort of Google approved stuff, I would say. You're very much a sort of a white hat kind of approach to SEO, and so you spend quite a lot of time making sure that you cover Google Search Console or these kind of things, so that they're at least covered in the system. So you're saying that in book 2, then you'll go perhaps into some really sort of technical bits that are considerably deeper than you are in the first book.
Yeah. So SEO Manager's talking points are the important SEO issues to be discussed with the team or agency. And in this book, I simply describe it at that level. I really don't want to scare them from buying the next 2 books.
Probably fair enough. That's good.
Yeah,
that's good. So, I mean, thank you very much for writing it. I mean, it's called The Accidental SEO Manager, and it's on Amazon. It's on Kindle. It's literally on my Kindle right now, and is a good read. But let's just find out a little bit more about the real Ash Nallawalla and where he came from. Let's hear about your backstory. Tell us about your early life. I mean, New Zealand's a long way from most of us, because my audience are in the US or the UK largely. Tell us about your early life. What interested you? How did you end up in accountancy of all things? Was maths your favorite subject at school?
No, it was my worst. It was the least favorite subject. I was born in India, in Bombay in particular. And just to drop some names, I was a correspondent of Lord Mountbatten, who was the Governor General of India after he was Viceroy before independence.
The guy that got blown up in
unfortunately,
by the IRA. Yeah.
And I was in the United States on a student exchange for 4 months, and I'd completely missed that news, because in the US, as you may have noticed, not much international news comes up. And I was a student, so there was less opportunity. And it was 2 or 3 years later that I discovered that's what had happened to him. But I knew him because my uncle was his personal photographer.
Oh, wow.
For the independence ceremony. And I had swapped some photos with him, some duplicates that we had in the house. And he would then write to me once a year. And I developed a fondness for a girl in New Zealand who was my pen pal. And I wanted to see her. And I couldn't get a visa.
Oh, right.
So he then wrote to the Governor General of New Zealand.
Useful friend.
Yeah, and he wrote to the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who wrote to me with bad news. He said, sorry, I lost the election, so I'm in opposition. And he gave it to the Minister for Immigration, who then got himself arrested by the French. You can't make this up. So if you look back at the news of the early 70s, you'll find that New Zealand sent a frigate to Murura Atoll in the South Pacific to protest against the French nuclear tests. And so he went on a Navy frigate. The whole frigate got arrested, including him. So that delayed things a bit, but he got me the visa and I got to New Zealand. I tried to study accounting. I worked for a chartered accountant. And then I realized I really hated accounting. So I got married. I met my wife in Dunedin, New Zealand. And we moved to Australia, where I joined the Royal Australian Air Force. And I was an officer there for 8 years.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
So that was my early start to computers. I built my first computer by hand by soldering it together. It was an Australian Z80 based computer called the Microbee. And Z80. You might find my name in Wikipedia.
Z80, ZX80, the Sinclair thing.
Well, Sinclair also had a Z80.
Oh, right. Okay.
ZX81.
Yeah.
There were 2 Sinclair models, at least 2. But this was an Australian chip that used a Zilog Z80 chip in it.
Okay.
And you could only assemble it you could only use it by assembling the kit.
What would the kids of today do? I'm sure plenty of them.
Yeah. Well, the commercial computers, it's begun to appear, like the Apple II was out there, but it was out of reach. So I could never afford that as a young married person trying to save a deposit for a house. So that didn't happen. But this knowledge, plus my background in amateur radio. So I'm a ham radio operator. My call sign now is VK3 Bravo Tango, VK3BT.
Okay.
But those little skills all came together, knowing electronics, building a computer, and slowly moving on to CPM. And through CPM, I moved on to MS-DOS before Windows was released.
So if you're playing with CPM, so would you say you were a programmer before you were a marketer?
Not, well, by qualification, yes, I did a computer science graduate diploma, but I've never worked as a programmer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It gave me the fundamentals. It made it easy for me to talk to developers, but I never needed, other than writing little routines for text processing, I definitely did that. I used Turbo Pascal as the language because our university taught us a form of Pascal in Unix, whereas at home I had Turbo Pascal. Okay.
Interesting stuff. I mean, I think it's fascinating that that you leveraged your Mountbatten connections to get your visa into New Zealand. That's great stuff, and an interesting backstory, I think. So thanks for sharing with us. But Ash, this isn't your first book or your first series of books. You've written some other things as well. What else is out there that that we might have seen?
So I mentioned the microbit computer. Now, being an Australian computer, it didn't have the luxury of 50 books being written and available, as was the case for any American computer books. Like if you had an Apple or an IBM PC, there were 50 to 100 books already out there. So 3 of us got together at a computer club, and we noticed that we were writing articles for the club magazine. We decided to get together and collate all our writings and write a little bit more. And we put them into 4 books called Wildcards, volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4. We were lucky that when volume 3 was released, that a publishing company known as Pittman, the famous shorthand people, they knocked on our door and bought us out. Great. Every last copy that we had. So I've got no spare copies of those books now.
Really?
Other than one for myself, but none if someone asked me for a copy. And
what, did Pittman burn them, or did they sell them, or did they produce their
own?
No,
they not only sold them, but they reprinted volume 3 and 4 in a smaller format, physical format. So you'll find them on Wikipedia if you look for Microbe, or if you look for my name, you'll see a list of these books. So the 5th book that I wrote was in 1985. It was about my radio listening hobby, which is known as radio DXing. It is titled Better Radio and TV Reception. I got together with a very famous radio listener. He was blind. His name was Arthur T. Cushion, MBE. He lived in Invercargill, and in the early years, he made a name for himself by taking down lists of prisoners of war during World War II. He would listen to the Japanese transmissions, wrote down the names of POWs, and he gave them to the government. And then he was a famous listener with a session on Radio New Zealand, Radio Netherlands, and so on. And being in the next city from Dunedin, I met him many times. And the other author is Brian Clark, who lives now north of Auckland. He's still active in the hobby. So that was my 5th book. And then there was a huge gap. There was an unfinished book somewhere in between about lead generation from my CRM days. But that never got beyond 60 pages. So it's just sitting there as a Word document. never to be finished.
Well, I found out that the minimum size book that you need for an Amazon Kindle is 72 pages, by the way, just just in case you ever want to write a short one like I did.
Right.
So I thought I'll be short to the point on mine. So I mean, what advice would you give for other writers, particularly writers? I mean, I'm not talking about fictional writers, but if anybody in the SEO space or in the marketing space or even in the technical space wanted to write a book, have you got any tips for people that they might think about?
Yeah, so this book that I've released started life many years ago, but the first word started being captured in the Word document 3 years ago.
Okay.
And for a whole year, there wasn't much movement. I might write a chapter name, a paragraph heading, perhaps a paragraph here or there. And I was slowly trying to assemble my thoughts. In those days, I was joking to my staff that I need to write a book about the value of ignorance. And they looked at me strangely and said, "What?" Well, if you think about it, there are many kinds of ignorance out there, and we pay people with the knowledge to solve those problems, whether it's a plumbing problem, electrical problem. And similarly, SEO needs skills that an ignorant company can't afford to be ignorant about. And hence I was playing with that title, and I thought, nah, no one's going to buy a book if you're insulting them on the cover. Well, maybe some books are written like that, they're cheekier, but I recommend to people, there's a book in, at least one book in most of us, especially amongst SEOs. And when I started talking about this book, several have said to me that, yes, they are writing a book or they are thinking of writing a book. And when you think about what is out there for SEO, my advice is look for the gaps. For example, affiliate SEO. Are there many books on affiliate SEO? I don't know. Many affiliates just don't like to give away their secrets. But if they think that there is enough generic information that can be put out there without revealing their personal sites, then please do that. There are many kinds of such SEO. I know Brent Payne has put out a book on law firms, SEO for law firms.
Yeah. So well, certainly when I wrote about entity SEO and entities, that fitted into a gap very nicely. But also, I felt it scratched an itch for me. I mean, it helped me define what I was thinking in terms of for me, understanding how to use knowledge graphs, how to use topics instead of keywords, and that whole mantra of things not strings. And it's been, it was very, very helpful and cathartic for me to write things down. I don't know if that's the same with you and Accidental SEO Manager. Is it a little bit of, putting your thoughts down on paper to get them out of your brain, or is that an unfounded reason for writing a book?
Well, I'll be 70 this year, and I might be the oldest SEO on the planet.
Oh, I know several that would challenge you on that one.
Okay. Well, I want to outlive them.
Okay.
Maybe I'm the oldest in-house SEO working for a salary for someone. So I might find a niche, or the oldest in the Southern Hemisphere, as we say about many things in the Southern Hemisphere, the tallest building and so on. Yeah.
Tallest building in the Southern Hemisphere. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Ash, it's been lovely. What's next for you? What are you going to be doing next? I mean, you're out in Canada now. How long are you out there for?
I'm here for another week. I leave Monday week, and I hope I don't get delayed. Like it took me nearly 36 hours door to door, thanks to an overnight stay in Los Angeles at my expense. So the airports are still not ready. They
Yeah.
appear to be working, but there are lots of horror stories out there.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I'll go back to my job, and perhaps in a year or two, I might decide to go back to consulting, which is a kind of semi-retirement that I was doing a year ago before a former colleague dragged me into this full-time role.
Back into his clutches.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
So Ash, thank you very much for coming on the show today. Thank you for your time. Really do appreciate it. Anybody out there on podcast land, you can get to the book by going to accidentalseomanager.com. I'm sure you can find it other places as well, sort of Amazon or whatever. But please do go out and have a look at it, and track down Ash. He's a lovely guy, and got a lot of other interesting stories to tell as well, and has got a lot of history to share with us all. Thanks very much for your time, Ash. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.